Hello, my name's Ian King and welcome to the International Corporate Law and Governance module, which I hope you'll enjoy and find it both challenging and stimulating. So what I want to do in this session is just to introduce you to the model, to the module, to tell you what we're going to be covering, what the learning objectives are, and also give you some indications as to the sorts of resources that you could be using, reading that will help you support your studies in this module. So first of all, the module aims. What we're looking for here is to give you, as it says, an advanced and critically analytical knowledge and understanding of the fundamental concepts of both corporate identity and corporate governance. We're going to study this in a global context. So initially we're going to be focusing very much on the UK and looking at how corporate law and governance developed in the UK. But we're going to be blending that with elements of law and governance from a variety of different countries, so particularly the US and other EU countries, so that we can really do some comparisons. One of the interesting things in corporate law is just how similar much of the laws are. So the basic format and structure of a company is really largely the same in whatever country you're looking at. Similarly, corporate governance has developed along very similar lines, and something that we're going to be referring to as we go through is the Cadbury report, which was a report on corporate governance which came out in 1992 in the UK. And in many ways that can be seen as the foundation of much of global corporate governance. However, there are some countries that have chosen to adopt a different model, in particular the US, so it's useful to be able to contrast the different approaches that companies have taken to corporate governance. So what we're going to be looking for from you in this module is very much critical analysis, logical thinking, and that will assist you in developing a range of transferable and generic problem-solving skills, time management and reasoning skills. So a bit more detail on the structure and what we're going to be covering. So in the first session we'll look at how corporate law has developed in the UK. So we'll be going right back to the very beginnings of the first companies back in the Middle Ages and seeing how the structure and the registration of companies has changed from the Middle Ages right through to the present day, including looking at some key developments during the mid-19th century. We'll be looking at the key concepts of corporate law, in particular the fact that a company is what we call a separate legal entity. A company has separate legal presence, separate legal identity from the people that both own the company and manage the company. In session 2, we're going on to look at really why we study corporate governance in the first place. So we'll look at a number of case studies of where corporate governance has gone wrong. There are lots of examples we can choose from, so we'll just focus on 3 or 4 of these. And we'll then be looking at some theories of corporate governance to try and explain why things do go wrong. Although corporate governance is in many ways, and corporate law is in many ways a very practical subject, it's clearly underpinned by theory as well. So in session 2 we'll be looking at those theories to try and have a greater understanding of why corporate governance is important. Session 3 we'll be looking at the regulatory architecture that countries have put in place to try and ensure good corporate governance of companies. We'll focus on the UK and look at the way that the UK has developed a voluntary code. We'll compare that with the US and the more strict compulsory legislative route that the US has gone down. Then in session 4, we'll be focusing on the role of directors. So we'll be considering this concept of the separation of ownership and management, which simply means that within a company you have the owners, the shareholders, and you have the managers, the directors. Those two are separate and they have different functions within the company. As the managers of the business, it's the directors who in many respects are the key players. And as we'll see, many of the key regulatory codes and the key regulatory statutes are focused very much on the behaviour of directors. In session 5, we'll be moving on to look at how directors are both appointed and removed. So what control do the shareholders have over the directors? And we'll be looking at the operation of the board of directors. So although directors are appointed individually, they act collectively. So in managing the business, in determining the strategy of the company, they will act collectively through what's called the board. Session 6, we'll be looking at the duties that are imposed upon directors. In the UK, those duties have, in the 2006 Companies Act, been codified, so they're now on a statutory basis, whereas previously they were imposed by the courts, by the common law. And we'll look at how effective these tools, these controls on the powers of directors are, and how shareholders can use them in order to hold directors to account. Then in session 7, we'll be looking at, more broadly, the role of shareholders. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on the role of institutional investors. So corporate governance is a particular issue in relation to large companies that are listed on a recognised stock exchange like the New York Exchange or the London Exchange. And the shares, many of the shares in such companies are actually owned by institutions, banks, insurance companies, hedge funds, etc. So we'll be looking at what role those institutional investors play, and in particular how those investors can come to take a more active role in shareholding, which I think many people would view as being of great importance when it comes to ensuring good regulation of the companies that they own. Finally, in session 8, we'll be looking at the other corporate stakeholders. So what role do employees, finance providers, local and national government play in corporate governance? We'll be looking at the approaches taken to corporate governance in different parts of the world, for example, China, South America, etc., and Japan. And then we'll be trying to take a little glimpse into the future. So what are the current live issues within corporate governance, and what might be the issues that become increasingly important over the next 5 to 10 years. As far as support for your studies on this module, one of the great things about company law is that there are a very wide range of extremely good company law textbooks. So I've referred to one there, Company Law by Roach, published by OUP. That's the one I've referred to specifically because it actually includes quite a lot on corporate governance as well. So although it's a good company law textbook, it weaves into it the rules, much of the theory, the philosophy behind corporate governance. So it's a good kind of combined textbook. There's also the book by Moore and Petrin, Corporate Governance, Law, Regulation and Theory, which focuses much more squarely on corporate governance. It's a very academic book. It contains a lot of theory and a lot of very important and very specific academic arguments in relation to corporate governance. So it's not necessarily the easiest book to read, but it's a really good one, and it will certainly help you in terms of the underpinning theories behind corporate governance. Corporate Governance by Malin is a good general textbook on corporate governance. It's quite accessible, quite easy to read, and gives you a lot of information, particularly from a global perspective. The other thing to note with corporate governance and indeed company law is that it is quite a practical subject, and it's a very relevant subject, so there are always things going on in relation to the corporate world and corporate governance. So we'll also be recommending to you articles to read, and I would also advise you to look out for news and current affairs stories. As I say, there's very often something happening in the world of corporate affairs and corporate governance, so do keep an eye on the press and on TV news reports. Finally, because regulators have been set up in many countries to regulate corporate governance, there are reports that are produced by these regulators which again provide a lot of particularly statistical information and reports on the effectiveness of the rules and regulations that they oversee. So I hope you enjoy this module, and we'll start off in session 1, as I said, by looking at some background company law. Thank you very much.